She knew it. The crowd knew it. Jesus knew it. What I find interesting is how Jesus responds. Because Jesus' response to the crowd is different from Jesus' response to the woman. To the crowd, Jesus says, "Why are you sitting here in judgment of her, ready to stone her? Which of you is without sin? Let him cast the first stone." Jesus' response to the crowd is to say, "You're so focused on her sin, you've forgotten to show grace. You've forgotten about the plank in your own eye because you're so busy worried about what's in her eye." Then the crowd leaves, and Jesus says to the woman, "Go and sin no more." You have to have both pieces. And what I find is so often the case in these kinds of debates is that we are presented with the option of either say that this isn't a sin, or focus on it and talk only about how sinful it is and how disgusting and immoral these folks are, and we love them by telling them over and over and over again how sinful they are. But when it comes to the question of what can we do as a church to love them, other than that, what needs do they have? What grace do they need to be shown? We don't have a lot of answers. I think about how the church has somewhat shifted its approach to divorce. Now, there are some churches that don't teach that divorce is a sin, but my church continues to teach that divorce is a sin. But one of the things my church does now that it might not have done several decades ago is it recognizes that while divorce may be a sin, the people who have just gone through a divorce are often in tremendous pain and have a lot of needs that the church can meet. And the church can do something other than just talk about how sinful the divorce was. The church can focus on, hey, tell us your story, help us meet your needs, tell us what we can do for you. And that's a wonderful thing when it happens in the case of divorce. I find as a gay person that it rarely happens for gay folks. Now, the passages that Dr. White brought up, there are Christians within my organization who would argue that those passages do not condemn a modern-day monogamous, loving, committed relationship. And as I said, I explore that a little bit in my book, in one chapter out of 13. But it's not really what I wanted to focus on in my book. Because what I wanted to focus on is, what we can agree on is that those passages deal with people's sexual activity. Now, when I'm standing before you, I'm not engaged in any sexual activity. I'm single. I use the word gay for myself. And I'll tell you why. Because I needed a word that was shorthand for I am attracted to other members of the same sex and I am not attracted to members of the opposite sex, because it's kind of a mouthful. And one of the things that often happens in these kinds of conversations is I find that other Christians focus just on one part of that and not on the other. They talk over and over about resisting the temptation of my same-sex attractions. But they forget about why it might be an issue for me that I have no opposite-sex attractions. They focus on resisting the urge to have sex, as if being gay were all about wanting to have sex all the time. But they don't think about the emotional needs that I might have. Am I to be celibate and single for the rest of my life? If so, if that's what God calls me to, I'm certainly willing to accept whatever God calls me to. But surely everybody would understand why that would be a challenge, and why that might not be something I would want to do, and why I might have needs emotionally and want the church to be there for me. After all, my mom is right now dying from a horrible progressive brain disease that may be genetic. If I contract the same disease when I'm in my 50s, who will take care of me the way that my dad takes care of my mom? If the church's message to me is, resist your temptations, be celibate, and everything will be fine, who's going to be there to support me when my friends are all married off and raising their kids? These are questions that many of my straight Christian friends haven't really thought about. And I don't blame them, but this is the kind of stuff that I think we should be talking about. And I think it's telling that when we talk about homosexuality in the church, So often the conversation goes back over and over to, let's debate about Romans 1 and 1 Corinthians 6 and all of this. But we don't talk a whole lot about what can we do to move forward in a way that's loving and productive and supportive of everybody. There's a lot I want to say about this, and I don't have time, but I will say one other thing. The word gay has shifted in its meaning significantly. I find that folks who've been around for a while still associate it with a certain political identity, because at one time it had that identity. I find when I talk to young folks today that they understand it in a very different way. Young folks today understand the word gay to be defined as someone who is attracted exclusively to the same sex. And so for a young person today to say, I'm attracted to the same sex, but I don't identify as gay, doesn't make any sense. And one of the reasons I talk in my book about ex-gays and why the term ex-gay is going away, and why we need to rethink how we talk about these issues, is that the church is losing a lot of young people who, when they hear the church talk about gay folks only in terms of sexual behavior, or say that same-sex attracted people aren't really gay, the young folks today think that we're out of touch in terms of the language, at best, and at worst, that we're being deceitful as Christians. And that's part of the reputation we have, and that's one of the reasons that when I use the word, I want to use the language that folks today are using, and I want to say, look, these other folks who may be doing lots of things that I disagree with and that you disagree with, they are like me. I know what it's like to be them, and I don't want to put a wall and say, hey, I'm the good guy and they're the bad guys. I want to say, we're all in the same boat, we've made different decisions, and how can we show grace to everyone who's going through this?
Thank you, Justin. We'll now welcome Dr. White to come up for a 10-minute response.
The debater in me would like to address some of the things that Justin said in his book, some of the texts that he quoted, but since he hasn't presented them, that really wouldn't be appropriate for me to do. If you'd ever like to know what someone like me thought of, especially the hermeneutic of love material that you presented, I would be happy to correspond with you about that. What I would like to do in light of what Justin just said is to try as best I can as a minister of the gospel